On this episode of Still Loading, the Sega Master System. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are diving into a very underappreciated game console. This is a console that set up the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive if you're from literally anywhere else but North America. But we are going to be talking about the Sega Master System today, and the Sega Master System was Sega's first, not first foray into the home console market. It was actually their third, but we'll get into all that. And with me today to talk about this underappreciated and underloved console is G from G to the Next Level. G, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellently. How you doing?
I am doing fantastic. A little tired, but it is the state of parenthood, and it's just my go-to thing now. Just always tired. So we're here to talk about the Sega Master System. So before we dive into it, just some quick facts about it. The Sega Master System was originally released in Japan in 1985 under the name of the Sega Mark III, which we'll go into why that naming scheme was so wonky, on October 20th, 1985, and it didn't come over to North America until September of 1986. And then importantly, it came out in Brazil in 1989. Why is that important? Well, G and I know, but we'll fill you in a little bit. So before we go full on out with this, G, what are some of your earliest memories of the Sega Master System, or just any memories you have of the console in general?
Okay, well, and memories from the Master System for me, because we actually did not get a Master System growing up. My first real exposure with the Master System was, but we were already familiar with Sega, because my dad and we used to play in the arcade all the time, and the arcade that we used to play at was mainly, I guess, maybe they had some partnership or relationship with Sega, or maybe they just really love Sega, so we got a chance to play like all the big arcade games. So they had Outrun, they had Afterburner, they had Altered Beast, they had pretty much any of the major games, Space Harrier, any of the major ones that you could think of. So we were familiar with those franchises, but we didn't actually get a home Sega console until the Genesis in 91. But of course, I can remember the very first time that I actually got exposed to the Master System, because I didn't even really know that the Master System was a thing, even when we got the Genesis in 91, because as many people probably know, the Master System had hardly like any sort of advertising or marketing or anything like that in the United States. It might as well have been a ghost. For the most
There's
part.
A good reason for that. We'll get into it.
Right, exactly. But I remember going home for Christmas. Now, I live in Texas. Most of my family's from Louisiana. But we went home and I visited one of my family members. And I remember they had a Master System. And I was wondering, what is that? And it's like, oh, that's the Sega Master System. It's like, Sega Master System? Like, I'd never even heard of this before. And Shonda's like, oh, well, you know what? Let's play. And the game that they had a handful of games. But I remember one game specifically that made me like, okay, I want this, was Double Dragon. And that was the very first game on the Master System that I ever played. It was me and my cousin playing 2-player Double Dragon, which blew my mind because...
Very important to note.
Yes, because my dad and I had played Double Dragon in the arcade. And we had played it on the NES. But we had never played the Master System version. We didn't even know a Genesis one existed at that point. But there was one on the Master System, and we're like, and it's 2-player? And like, I want this. But then my parents were like, we're not buying you another Sega system. We already have a Sega system. You don't need this. But then that's when we found out about the power-based converter. So we got the power-based converter, and then we got Double Dragon. And even though I didn't really go as hard into the Master System, it was kind of fleeting with me as a kid. We didn't really go nearly as hard into it as we did into the Genesis. But I remember that one specific moment where I was like, okay, this is really, really cool. And then throughout the years, just learning more about the Master System, it's such a fascinating console that it's a dig that I feel that a lot of people, that especially now since Sega is kind of on the rise when it comes to like the retro community, like a lot more people are interested in Sega, but many people still haven't touched the Master System. And when people talk about it, it's like my ears perk up like, oh, Master System? We get to talk about Master System? That's why I'm glad to be here today.
I'm glad to have you on. And you're right, man. Sega has, especially in some recent years, Sega has been very, very hands-on with their community and with the retro gaming community specifically, which, we're going to be talking about Nintendo on this episode a lot because of the console wars, but we're not going to be focusing on them in terms of like what they did. It's more going to be like what, the back and forth between Sega and Nintendo, but as a huge juxtaposition to what Nintendo does, where they pretty much shut out any fan project possible
Correct.
for almost
Yeah.
any of their IP. Sega's like, nah, man, nah, fuck it. You do whatever you want. You want to make it. I mean, didn't they promote like that? Isn't there a big like Sonic ROM hack? Like an event type of thing where the people show off all their Sonic ROM hacks and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Now,
And
Sega doesn't like really actively promote it, but there's the sheer fact that they let this happen. Like they're aware that it exists and they let this happen. They're really kind of encouraging it, silently
yeah,
encouraging it. And it's really, really cool. And then that's why I like so many of these other fan-based projects that are happening. The reason why we got Sonic Mania. It's actually one of the reasons why Streets of Rage 4 is a thing. Like many of these other franchises that Sega might not necessarily want to bring back themselves, but they're giving the blessing of other companies or other creators to do that is actually really awesome. Meanwhile, Nintendo's like, no, none of that, none of that,
well,
none
and
of that.
didn't you do a collaboration recently with Sega of Europe?
I did. I did. Yeah, they brought me on just to talk about like, hey, what Sega means to me and why I became such a fan like over the years and why essentially it's become a gigantic part of my life between the Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, come on now. That's really
Yeah.
what made me as a gamer. It did.
And it really shows that Sega has a love for their history. And I know they don't really talk as much about the Master System because it at least in North America and Japan, both actually in North America and Japan, it did not do much for them. I wonder what Sega of is there a Sega Brazil, do you know? Like, how there's Sega of America and Sega of Europe. Is there a Sega of Brazil? I don't know.
There isn't really a Sega Brazil, but essentially they allow Tectoy, like the company Tectoy, to basically run the show for Sega over
Okay.
in Brazil. But Sega doesn't
Okay.
actually have a Brazilian dedicated division. I don't think so.
That's surprising because it's I guess, well, I mean, this will be a little tease for what we're going to be talking about later on, but like the Master System is technically the longest running. It has the largest lifespan of any console, considering the fact that it still technically is going, but
Yes.
only in Brazil. Every other console at some point gets discontinued. It stops being manufactured. Uh, what is it? The PS2 finally stopped being manufactured in like 2012 and 2013 after like 12 or 13 years of being on the market. The Master System came out in 1989 in Brazil. Like I said before, it's still going. It's still technically considered an active an active console. And to put it in perspective, in Japan it was discontinued in 91. In North America it was discontinued in 92, and in Europe it lasted a little bit longer. It was discontinued in 96. But Brazil, it's still going strong, and that is nuts to think about, that technically this console has outlived everything else.
Yes. And yet many people still don't know about it over here. But
Yeah.
man, it's like this that's what's awesome about and what's so fascinating about the Master System.
So the Master System started its life sort of under like the way Sega created the Master System was that it's part of a series of console called the SG-1000 series, and the original Sega home console was the SG-1000, which came out literally the same year as the Famicom, which we know in North America as the NES. So it's kind of nuts to think about that most people, including myself, didn't know the Master System even existed. I remember, to kind of tie into one of the only memories I have of the Master System, and by only memories I mean when I found out it existed. I I was like learning about video game history, early 2010s I want to say, so not even that long ago. It's like a decade, maybe less. And I remember learning, like, wait, there is a system that Sega made before the Genesis? What are you talking about? No, that's not true.
Exactly.
That's not
Exactly.
true. And it exists. We're talking about it right now, and that surprised me. And who would have thought that Sega would have technically got into the home console market the exact same time as Nintendo? Difference being is that the Famicom took off incredibly well in Japan. The SG-1000 was not a failure, but it was nowhere near the same level as the Famicom. And then they released the SG-1002, I believe. I forget what it was called,
Correct.
actually.
It was.
SG-1002. That's so dumb. You have the SG-1002, and then you have the Sega Mark III, which is the third iteration of the SG-1000 series. And then the Sega Mark III, they ported over to, not ported, but they brought over to North America, gave it an overhaul, gave it a cosmetic overhaul, and now we have the Sega Master System.
Yep, correct. And the SG-1000 was another system that I really didn't have any idea existed until way, way, way later. But again, going back and looking at the games for it, it's also pretty fascinating, especially seeing one of my favorite Genesis games, Flicky, which is also based off an arcade. And then I saw, oh, well, there's an SG-1000 version of Flicky, but it never got a Master System version, which is odd. But it got on the Genesis. So that's one thing that I always kind of it was kind of confusing to me about it. But then once the Mark III kind of came around, of course, the Mark III was also backwards compatible with the SG-1000. So that was actually really cool. I have a Mark III now. I never owned one before, but a couple of years ago, my buddy Jamie from Stuff We Play, she actually gave me one. It's like, it's beautiful. So cool. And it's awesome.
I actually
so now
really
I have an SG-1000 I could play.
I actually legit like the visual design of the SG-1000. It's white with like this really pretty blue sticker with the Sega logo on, which I don't know, man. That Sega logo, I'm not just saying this because you're on the episode. I just think it's timeless. Like the way the font that they use for Sega is just beautiful. It never gets old. Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it right now. It's very simplistic. It looks very much like a toy. It doesn't look like a video game console so much as it does a toy, but it still looks like really sleek and really cool, at least in my opinion.
Oh no, it absolutely is. It looks like a little mini computer.
It does. I mean, it literally says computer video game built into it, like right on the sticker there. If you do want to, like, I don't know if you've ever watched this guy's stuff. I'm gonna look it up while we're talking, and hopefully I'm correct with this. But there's a dude named Jeremy Parrish from from another video game podcast called Retronauts, which I shout out all the time.
Oh yes, Retronauts.
On here, yeah. He has his own YouTube channel. And he called Video Works, and it's just him like basically trying to do like a cron gaming type of thing where he'll go through the entire library of a specific console or something like that. So he's been going through like Game Boy, and he's been going through NES, and he's been going through Famicom, and he's been going through, all these other stuff. And I believe he's been going through the SG-1000 games.
Oh, nice.
And like he like takes pictures of them, and like he did a I'm looking at it right now. He has a series of videos called Sega Gaiden, and they are all like the third episode of that is about the SG-1000. So I don't know how far he goes into it. I'm going to click on the playlist right now and see if I can find it. But yeah, he goes through a whole bunch of stuff with it, and it's pretty interesting. It looks like he's doing a bunch. I don't know. We'll look at it more later. Otherwise, because the titles don't really give me enough info on it. But anyway, but he goes through, as far as I'm aware, he is going through the SG-1000 games and playing them because he's trying to kind of get a really good idea of, not like when you're looking at the history of video games and you're trying to see where certain trends and certain concepts and game design techniques started, you can, you might go back to your go-to one as a kid, like, oh, I remember first seeing it in this game. But he's really trying to like go through everything and see where all the influences came from. So he's just going through everything. Nice. It's nuts. Anyway, Sega Master System. So obviously, the Sega Mark III was the third iteration of the SG-1000 series. They brought it over to North America under the name Sega Master System, and it didn't sell outrageously well, like at all. Not to say that it was a complete, like, it obviously the console's not a bad console, but it's just one of those things. They didn't know how to market it well. Nintendo already had a foothold at that point in the US because it came out a year later than the NES did. So it kind of got burned from the get-go. And then on top of that, I thought this was interesting. When I was doing some history on it, they decided to license it to Tonka.
Correct. I was just about to talk about that because you were talking about how it's like,
Go into
hey,
it.
it sounds like it's like you were saying, it's like, hey, it kind of looks like a toy. I was like, well, that's ironic considering that in other areas of the world, Tonka was a distributor for it, a toy company.
In North America, it was a distributor for it. That's
Yeah.
what's crazy. They had no, and it makes sense. They had no idea how to really market a game console because they were a toy console or a toy manufacturer, and it is very, as much as back then video games and toys were kind of conflated together, they are still very different types of merchandise. So it's not surprising Tonka didn't do the greatest job. With that said, though, even though it still didn't sell well, from what I was able to understand is that they did sell better under Tonka than it did when Sega was just trying to distribute it out in North America. Still didn't
Oh.
sell great, but it did better. Yeah, it was like a 20% increase, or it was 20% higher than expected under Tonka. So, which is great, but it just did, it still didn't really make that much of a foothold in North America. They did have a crazy promotional tour, though, called the Sega Challenge, where they had astronauts and stuff. Did you know this?
That I didn't know.
Yeah, I'm double checking. Yeah, it was with like a space project. So there was a thing called Project Mercury, was the first human space flight program in the US, and it was running from 1958 through 1963. I'm very confused by this, but basically from what I could see here, at least from what I found, was there was a big marketing thing where they embarked on a promotional tour of the US with the Sega Challenge, fronted by Project Mercury. Oh, I'm sorry, fronted by Project Mercury astronaut. So it's the astronaut, not the project. Project Mercury astronaut Scott Carpenter. So he was used as a way to like get people to play the Sega Master System, I guess.
Oh, that's cool.
That's pretty
See,
interesting.
well, that's one thing you can always count on Sega for. In the early days of that, it's just their promotions for basically either touring or getting on television or anything like that. You can always count on them doing something crazy and wacky. That's for sure.
I mean, they were trying. I mean, they were trying to do everything. I mean, look at the. I mean, people talk about it all the time now, but they're advertising stuff for the Genesis on how they
Yep.
were. It worked, man. It worked. I mean, Nintendo went from. I was looking at it here. Nintendo had like what it was like an 80 to 90% share of the video game market in North America at the time.
Hmm.
And by the time Sega was done with them with the Genesis, it was more 50-50. That's huge. Like obviously Nintendo still had at least half of the market, but going from an 80 to 90% sharehold to a 50-50 is just, that's nuts.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Sega gave them a good black eye for a while, but
Hmm.
knocked out a couple of teeth and whatnot. But at the end of the day, though, it's like they still only got to 50.
Well,
But that's okay though.
at the end of the day, Sega unfortunately gave themselves their own black eye more
Yeah,
than Nintendo and Sony did. But that's
yeah.
a conversation maybe for another episode. That'd be kind of fun if you'd be interested to do like a where did Sega go wrong episode.
I'd be cool with that. I would
That'd
definitely
be
be cool with that.
That'd be really fun. So yeah, they also released the console over in Europe, and Europe was an interesting market because home consoles never really did well. Like the NES did not do well over there at
No.
all. It was more of a like a microcomputer market, the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and they distributed the console through a couple different companies over there. Not I mean, I'm not going to list them all off because the distributor depends on which country that it's from and blah, blah, blah. But it did modestly well in Europe, like much better than it did in North America.
Oh
But
yeah.
then where it really killed, I always thought this was funny, on the Sega Retro site, all it says about the Australian release is that it sold 650,000 units, and that's all it says. There's no other details on how it was distributed, how it did there. Like, is 650,000 good for that market? I don't know. Uh, who knows? But Brazil, man, Brazil is where it took off.
Oh yeah, like over in Brazil, it was king, and it's like, and even to an extent, just the sheer fact that it's still going through now just means that not only did it make such a huge impact in video game culture, but just in culture over there, just as a whole. The whole story about Tectoy, just as, and so I'm sure we're gonna, when we start talking about some of the games, we're gonna talk about some of the Tectoy exclusives, because that's where the real meat of the Master System really starts coming in. Because it's like, well, people will say, okay, well, the Master System doesn't have any games. Like, well, actually, yeah, it does. It's just over in America we didn't get many of them. But if you
Hmm.
go to the overseas catalog, oh, that's where the real juiciness is.
Oh yeah, and I don't know much about like um I don't know much about what Tectoy did specifically that's different. Like actually, I don't know if you know this or not. Does Sega still technically get royalties for their map? Would like Sega still get like some type of monetary compensation for what Tectoy's doing with the Master System over there?
I'm not 100% sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if yes. I mean, it makes sense, like if they did, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, I don't know either. Apparently, at some point in the mid 2000s, they dropped the cartridge slot over there because they were still
Yes.
releasing different models of it, which is kind of interesting. So I wonder if it's just like the kind of like what they do with like those like the NES Mini type of thing.
Right, because it's funny because like they came out with so there's some well, I mean, we're probably getting a little ahead of ourselves, but they came out with the Master System one and then the two, and then there was the Master System three, like the Roman numeral three, which still had a
Hmm.
cartridge slot, and then there's the Master System three, the number three that doesn't have the cartridge slot, and I'm like, what? Talking about naming conventions and confusion. I mean, forget Microsoft and the Xbox. I mean, Sega
I
was
know,
doing that
right?
first.
Sega has a nasty habit that's like amazing in retrospect, but it's almost always bit them in the butt of just beating the competition to innovations, whether it's shitty naming
Yes.
conventions like that, or if it's just a technological innovation like I'm even thinking like the Sega Channel, which, you know, at least in North America,
Hmm.
it beat almost every online service for like console specific online service. I believe there was something I looked up and I've talked about it before in the podcast. I can't remember what exactly it was called, but it was like there was an online service for the Atari 2600, but it was not like sanctioned by Atari. It was like a third party company. So like Sega still technically beat all the other home consoles to it, but I just can't remember what it was called. Game Line, that's what it's called.
Oh, okay. As I said, I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of the name of it. Well, it's like with the X Band, and its online capabilities. Like there was some that were ahead of its time, but Sega Channel was one of the first ones to really like get into the homes and make it simple and it'd be semi cost effective and just a lot of fun. And yeah, but again, you're absolutely right. Sega, as much as because as much as I love them, it's unfortunate that they almost wind up being the martyr, so to speak. Like they're the ones
Yeah,
to come out with this awesome new technology and new things that you could do and whatnot, and then Nintendo just comes right back and steals the thunder,
it's not
or
even just Nintendo
Sony
too,
steals
yeah.
the thunder,
I
or
mean,
like
like,
anybody.
it
Yeah.
sucks because if you think about, you know, like, the Saturn got its
Yep.
thunder got stolen, well, kinda by
Oh,
Sega itself,
well,
but,
yeah, yeah. That's a whole
but
other thing.
that's a whole 'nother thing. But, Saturn got stolen by combination of Sega's work as well as probably more Sony than Nintendo on that one. And then the Dreamcast, obviously, the PS2 is what killed it. It just
Yep.
and it sucks because it was a great it still is a great console. There's a lot of good stuff for it. But with the Master System, what's interesting about it from a tech standpoint is that it was more powerful than the NES.
It was.
It could show more colors. I believe it had more sound channels. I don't know for certain. Do you know what the difference would be? Like what the I don't know if you know the color palette difference, like the number of colors type of thing, but I know it was more.
Honestly, I don't know the color palette difference, but yes, you are correct. I mean, the Master System, just as a whole, from a technology standpoint, was a stronger system than the NES. Like it absolutely was, but it just really comes down to. I mean, we can talk about the Nintendo Switch. Perfect example. It's just like when it comes down to you might not be the strongest player in the game, but if you have the third party support and you have you have the community support and you have the sales support, you could beat the bigger boys. Unfortunately, Master System just didn't have that.
And I would argue it wasn't their fault for not having it because Nintendo's super restrictive licensing
Yes, 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 yes.
agreements. I mean, don't get me
Wasn't there an issue with Double Dragon? I think that there was some legal kerfuffle or something like that regarding Double
really.
Dragon when Sega released their version versus Nintendo's version. Like, because Sega published Double Dragon, so like
I didn't
I
know
think
that.
maybe again, don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I thought that there was some legal kerfuffle with that. I could be wrong on that.
I
But no, I
don't
mean, I
know
wouldn't
for
be surprised
certain.
if not, though, because yeah, Nintendo and their legal team back then, they were savage.
Oh, I mean, they
Still
sued
savage.
everybody. They sued
Still savage.
everybody. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it as it's okay to do that, but it really worked. They
Mhm.
owned that generation for like Nintendo. I mean, they're never going to see that much of a foothold in a market as they did back in the NES. It's just physically impossible now in the current market. So like they kept it because of all how litigious they were. It was nuts.
Yeah,
And to
agreed.
put it to highlight the difference though between the Master System and the NES, Double Dragon, the original Double Dragon on the NES, you couldn't play two players simultaneously. There was no co-op. It was just versus.
Correct.
But on the Master System, you could play it co-op, which is the whole reason I have a copy of Double Dragon for the games or for the Master System, because you could actually play with somebody with that.
Man, that just made that version so good, you know?
It's
And
so good.
yeah. I mean, don't get me
Uh,
wrong, the NES version was still really good too, but yeah, the Master System one operates on a whole nother set of rules.
it's better. I mean, it's the definitive home console version of that game. At least as far. I mean, you said it was on the Genesis as well, Double Dragon.
It is. It is on Genesis as well, and I found the Genesis version is still really good too. But I found that, yeah, I don't know, something about the Master System version, just the way that it feels, the way that the control feels, just feels better than the Genesis one. I feel that all Genesis one looks like the arcade more. I found that from how the game feels standpoint, I like the Master System version too. And when we talk about games, that's one of the things too is that I want to talk about, because mainly with Master System games, there's a lot of times that the same game will come out on both the Master System and the Genesis, and some of the Master System versions, I mean, in my opinion, honestly, but some of the Master System versions are better. Like, and a lot of
I
people
mean, I
don't know
wouldn't be
that.
surprised. I wouldn't, because like we said, it was a more powerful system. So it,
Well, I mean, like between the Genesis, not the NES.
oh,
But
okay.
yeah,
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. Some people even like the I know they're not the same, but like the Sonic on the Master System, some people prefer that to the Genesis one.
yes, I'm one of them.
But it was a different game, right? It's a
It
slightly
is.
different game.
Well,
That's
it's
what
also on the
most
Game
people
Gear as
don't know.
well. So it's also on the Game Gear as well, but
So
it's
the
slightly
Master
different.
System is a port of the Game Gear version,
It's
and
yes,
vice versa. Maybe I don't know which.
right.
Okay. And I guess to talk about some of the hardware specifically, I don't know about like necessarily the specs. We talked about the color palette and the sounds. The sound was better on the Master System. One place where I think it kind of lacked was it didn't have a start and select button.
Yes,
It
and the
has an
pause
A
button
and
being on the console.
yeah, the pause button is on the console. It has A and B, and that's it. And the D-pad is kind of bad. I don't I
Mm,
don't really blame Sega for that as well either, because Nintendo patented their D-pad, which is arguably the best. At least in my opinion. What do you think though? Do you agree with that, or do you like the Master System's D-pad?
I do not like the Master System D-pad at
Yeah.
all. At all. I was one of the first people. Once I found out that you could use a Genesis controller with the Master System, I ditched the Master System
Wait,
controller
can you?
immediately. Yes, you can. The B and C button
Oh.
actually act as one and two. So, yep.
That's definitely I'm gonna have to use that then, because I hate the Master System controller. It is
Oh no, it's bad.
like you the diagonals sometimes don't hit anything.
Yep. Yep.
It is so the best way I could describe the Master System controller, the D-pad on it, is that just think of a square with like a circle in the middle of it for a fulcrum, and it doesn't really have good sensors on the outside. I can't describe it. I don't know. It does not work great.
I think you're getting it pretty accurately there.
Is that pretty close? Is that pretty
Yeah,
accurate?
that's pretty close. I mean, imagine like so you have a Nintendo D-pad, right? You have the up, down, left, and right. Let's say you have the NES D-pad. Now imagine building a square around that D-pad, like a perfectly square around that D-pad, filled all the rest of the open space with plastic, and there you go. That's the Master System D-pad. And I'm like,
I
no, why? That is not a good idea.
I am looking at a picture on Sega Retro site where I guess you could get like this add-on little joystick that you could put
Yep.
at the center of the D-pad as like a little nub. That seems like it would be better, but it seems kind of awkward to use still. Like I can't imagine that'd be comfortable like to rest your thumb on after playing for a while. Like I feel like it would dig into the tip of your thumb.
Oh no, that reminds me of the Are you familiar with the Gravis PC gamepads? Are you familiar with those from like back in the day?
I
They had the
think
little screw
so.
in ports. They had the exact same thing. They had
Ugh.
the mush D-pad, and they had a little screw in port that you could add a tiny nub on the inside. It was the exact same thing, and it didn't work then either.
Now, to talk about to kind of branch from hardware into gaming, I want to talk about something real quick. But is there anything with the hardware that I have neglected to go over, Gene? Is there anything that you still want to talk about with it?
Oh, well, we didn't really talk about the Sega card so much when we were
That
talking
was
about the
what
hardware for that.
that's what I
Yeah.
was going to be, to kind of use it as a transition into the gaming. I thought would be cool.
Oh, okay, got it.
Um,
Oh, well, yeah, I guess it is more on the on that. Well, I guess there's also the controllers because there's a couple of wacky controllers for the Master System as well that many people don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
There's something called the Sega Control Stick, I believe was the name of it. The
Okay.
Sega Control Stick. So imagine this, right? So you have a little mini joystick from the Master System. It's got
Okay.
the typical kind of joystick, and then you got your fire button 1 and 2, right? So it's kind of like imagine a stick shift on a car. That's kind of what it feels like, a stick shift on a
Mm,
car, right? And you got your
yeah.
buttons, your 1 and 2 buttons. Now take this, and swap them. Put the buttons on the left and put the shifter on the right for your control stick. And no,
You
you
know
can't turn
what?
it upside down and use it. Why?
You know, well, think of it this way. That's very forward thinking of them, because that's just making it more accessible for people who are have a different dominant hand. If you really think about it,
That
like
is
almost all
true.
controllers are designed for people with
That is
right
very
hand.
true.
So in a way, they were being super nice and being like, here's a controller for people who might be more comfortable using their left hand for the buttons and their right hand for the joystick or the D-pad or whatever.
Yeah, that is true. That actually is very true on that. Um,
I wonder, you know what, this is just a random gaming philosophical thought. How many people do you think have been turned off of gaming because every game is like right-handed, basically? Like, I understand, like, the games have now become so standardized that it's not quite as much of an issue. You can be left-handed and still control a game the same way. But I wonder if there is like a segment of the population out there who just can't get into games because everything feels like it's geared towards a certain handedness, you know?
I wonder. That's a good question. I probably say, well, I don't really think it's a huge percentage, but
I
I
doubt
believe
it
it
though
is
too,
there.
yeah.
I believe
I
it is there though.
I might have. I mean, I don't know any. I know, especially lately, there's a lot of people doing amazing work for accessibility advocates for, like maybe people who are hard of hearing slash deaf. I don't know if I'm using the improper terms. I apologize. Or maybe like there's a dude who was on a podcast I listened to who's a blind gamer who actually plays game through sound cues, which is really cool. And like, I wonder if I could talk to one of them and ask them, even because it's on the minor end. No offense to anyone who's left-handed, of course, but in terms of accessibility, because I feel like it's a much easier fix than someone who's either blind or deaf or something like that. Uh, but I wonder if they would know. You know what I'm saying?
I wonder. Yeah, that's something really to think about. I never really thought of that.
It literally just popped in my head. But anyway, sorry, you were talking about some of the different controllers before I went off on this philosophical rant.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, because there's that control stick, and then there's also a trackball controller that was made for sports pad football, right? It's
Okay.
interesting because it's a trackball controller. Once again, the buttons are on the left, but at least that you're using the trackball, it's still really really cool. Even with that game, like, but it still makes you wonder why they made a trackball game for a football game. It didn't necessarily need it, but however, you can use that trackball on other things for both the Master System and the Genesis, which is really really cool. Fun fact about this one is that if you have the Japanese version of Marble Madness for the Mega Drive, which is incredibly expensive, and I wish I had it in my collection. Because
Oof,
the
I didn't.
Japanese version of Marble Madness is different from the United States one, and
Oh,
the
good to know.
yeah, the Japanese one was done by Tengen, and the Western one was done by Electronic Arts. And
Oh,
however,
and
the Japanese
Tengen,
one is
yeah,
way better. But
that's
you
interesting
can
because
use
yeah, Tengen, it was that's a complicated history with Nintendo, but go on.
oh yeah yeah, but you can use a lot of people don't know this. You can use that sports pad trackball to do Marble Madness, the Japanese version. You can also use a mouse as well because there's a mode where you could flip the mouse upside down and you can use the trackball for Marble Madness. It's pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome.
But it's a neat little controller for going back to the Master System. Like it's a neat little controller for it, but it only really worked for just sports pad football. And I think there was a hockey game that it works with too. It's like, and that's basically it. And then of course there's the light phaser because Master System had their own light gun games. So light phaser, I'm sorry. And it's like there's the light phaser, and they had their own sort of ones which What was interesting though, because I know that there was some controversy with that because of the way that it looks, because it was black. So yeah, I know that was a thing. And then of course there's the 3D glasses, which there were a handful of games that actually utilized the 3D glasses. Again, Sega being ahead of its time, being one of the first companies to really do that. But the main ones that I was really familiar with growing up was that control stick, because I remember my cousin had one of those. So that was one, because we had the regular controller and then we had the control stick, and I was forced to use the control stick, so that was kind of
Of
awkward.
course, of course.
Like it's like the equivalent of a Mad Cat's controller. Here you go, you
Oh
can
my
have that one. But no, it's actually really not a bad controller. And apparently in Europe there was a driving wheel, I think. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, and
That's not surprising because, like, especially like F1 racing and stuff is really big over in Europe. So it wouldn't be surprising to me to have like a racing, like a driving wheel as like as a alternate controller for probably a racing game that's popular over there or something like that.
true, true. And then I guess the one last thing on the hardware to really think, actually, I guess there's really two other things that we didn't really get a chance to talk about. Is one, the built-in game.
Yes, that was going to be so. The two transition things into the games I was going to talk about
Oh, right,
was
we're
the
getting into
built-in
games now.
game. No, no, that's okay
Mhm.
because well. There's just two last notes that, like, just from what you were saying that came into my mind, and then we'll move on to the built-in game and the card, the Sega cards, as well as the actual cartridges. But the two things that popped in my mind: one, you mentioned the 3D glasses. We were talking off mic about this as well. The 3D glasses were designed by PS4 and PS Vita architect Mark Cerny, and I believe he
Ah.
also did the PS5. I not entirely sure about that. I'm going to double check on that because now I don't remember. Um, who designed the PS5? Google, tell me. So yeah, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, yeah, it was not Mark Cerny who did the PS5. That was Eugene Morisawa. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but so yeah. That was the first thing. The second thing that came to mind, you're talking about the trackball controller. Have you ever done a video, and we kind of buried the lead with this. G has his own YouTube channel, G to the next level, so you can go check him out. We're going to obviously plug it again at the end of the episode, as well as streaming on Twitch. But have you ever done a stream or done a video of you playing the games, playing like Sega Master System or maybe the non-intended games with a trackball?
I have not. I actually haven't tried that, but you've definitely given me an idea to.
That is something I think you could totally do. That would be something that would be really funny to do. Like show off the intended games and be like, "Well, what happens if you play Sonic for the Sega Master System with a trackball? How does that work?" That would be really fun.
That would be really cool. And it makes me think that, like, and I've mentioned this before too, because going into Sonic real quick is right when the Master System was around, because of course Sega released their Sonic arcade game that used the trackball, and whenever people ask them, well, hey, how come Sega Sonic the arcade game never came home? They're like, oh, we could never find a way to really properly bring the feel of the trackball home. Like, Sega, you literally released a trackball controller.
Oh my
You could have done this.
I should have you back there. I don't want to do this episode for a little bit because Retronauts already did this type of thing, but I think it'd be fun to have you on to talk about Sega's arcade history
Oh
because
yes,
that is a
please.
super like I loved their episodes on it. They did like a 4-part, like each episode was like an hour and a half to 2 hours of them just like talking through like year by year what Sega made and the innovations that each cabinet. I have a book I'm going to show you after we're done recording um, about the Sega arcades. I think you'll really like it. I don't want to
Ooh.
say it on mic because it's a visual thing that it wouldn't do well over the podcast medium.
Well, of
But
course, of course.
anyway, so moving on into the games aspect of it. So what was cool about the Master System, and you alluded to this, is that there was a built-in game built in the console. Like you didn't have to have a cartridge or we were talking about the Sega cards, which we'll explain what those are in a second. You didn't have to have any of those in. You could just turn on the console. If nothing was in, you would play a game for free. I think it was just Snake, right?
There were a couple. There were
Oh,
most of
okay.
them actually. Yeah, there were a few of them. Most of them actually came with Snail Maze, where if you notice,
That's it.
it'll have the intro that will say, "Hey, go ahead and put your control or put your system in." So yeah, Snail Maze was the one that comes with most Master System consoles. Essentially, if you turn the Master System on without a game in there, it'll say, hey, here are the instructions on how to start playing, enjoy. But then if you press a button, the snail maze will basically shift over, and then you can play the built-in game, which is
Okay.
really, really cool. But there were several other different ones that did come through later on, but most people know about the snail game. But there was also Hang On. Hang On was one that came with certain models of the Master System. Alex Kidd Miracle World, perfect example. I have a Master System 1 and I have a Master System 2. My Master System 1 comes with Missile Defense 3D. That's another one that actually didn't, that a lot of people don't know came with some of them. So meaning that my Master System probably was the one that came with the 3D glasses. I do not have the 3D glasses.
I will have to see which one mine is because I've never tested it. I've never tested
Yeah.
which of the free games it is. It's not plugged in at the moment. I'll have to do that later on, but I might have to check that out then. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, because I mean, there's Alex Kidd, Safari Hunt, and Hang On. I'm sorry, it was both of them. Both of them actually came in one Missile Defense 3D, and then there's also a handful of them, and these are pretty rare, but a handful of them have Sonic the Hedgehog on it.
As the built-in so is it a Master System or Master System 2 that has the Sonic the Hedgehog built in?
I believe it's a Master System 2. Yeah, it's a
Okay,
Master
damn.
System 2 that actually
I
did.
got
It
really
was
excited. It's
not
like,
in
could
America.
mine be it?
Not in America. I believe it was a
Yeah.
European one.
Because what is it? Did Master System 2 come out? So Master System 2 is just for, because we haven't really talked about. That was actually one of the hardware things we probably should have mentioned. Now that I think about it,
Right. We talked about the Master System 3, but we didn't talk about the Master System 2.
I don't even remember talking about the. Oh yeah,
Oh,
I do
no,
remember. I do
we did.
remember that now. Sorry. Yeah, with the dumb naming conventions. But the Master System 2 was just kind of like how I equate it to what the NES or what Nintendo did with the Switch, where you have the Switch and then the Switch OLED, where it was like kind of a lateral movement. Though the OLED actually offered some upgrades. As far as I'm aware, the Master System 2 stripped stuff away from it, making it slightly less, like there was less stuff on it, but it stripped off features that no one used apparently.
Right. I kind of think of it's more of akin to like the NES and the NES top loader. It's like the
Okay.
NES that actually had come out for a while, and then they did the top loader later on, which they took away they did take away a couple of things for it. Mainly the fact that the Master System itself, one of the big things that's the difference between the Master System 1 and 2 is that Master System 2, they removed RGB. So if you're trying to connect like an
Oh,
RGB,
okay.
yeah, so the video output on it by default, I mean, of course you can modify it, but by default, it's not as clean as the original Master System. It's like the akin of a Genesis
Oh.
1 or a Genesis 2 compared to the Genesis 3. No RGB output. So, which nowadays is kind of becoming a big thing because it's a lot easier to upscale and get a true high definition picture out of your
RGB is the
Genesis.
most. I want to do an episode at some point about this, but like the differences, like it really technical specific episode where you talk about the differences of video signals. But I'm kind of like getting to know some of the dudes from My Life in Gaming.
Oh, yeah.
So I would love to have them on because they're the ones that, that's their whole channel, that's their whole shtick.
Right.
Um, and it's really interesting. But yeah, RGB video is beautiful. Especially, in all honesty, I don't think a console other than the ones that Sega has done, specifically the Master System and Genesis, do better RGB video. Like their RGB video is
It's
super
clean,
crisp. It's
crispy.
very crisp and clean. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
but
interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know the Sega Master System 2 stripped out the RGB capability.
well, that wasn't the only thing too. They took out that, they took out the card port, so that when you can't do the Sega
Yes.
cards on it, and it got rid of the reset button, which that makes no sense to me. I have a Master System 2. Fun fact about the Master System 2. So one cool thing about the Master System 2, at least it's cool on design and on paper, is that it has a rolling cartridge cover. So instead of you having the
Oh,
flaps, it
okay.
actually has a rolling one that you can push back. But
That's
the
kind of
thing
cool.
is that over time the elastic wears down, and then it'll sit there half open half the time when you try to close it. I'm like, whoops.
As with all
So
the good stuff, that's why you have to replace belt drives on disk for disk drives and shit like that. It just I love collecting gaming, but it always, or like I love collecting video games and consoles, but it just sucks when all that shit breaks down. It's so
yep.
depressing. So yeah, so that's the big difference. So that's the Sega Master System 2, and then like you said, there's a 3, but I believe the 2 never came out in North America. I think we only ever just got the Master System, right?
Oh
I
no
don't
no.
think
No,
did
we
we
got the
get
Master
2?
System 2.
Okay, we did get the Master. So it's still just the Master System, but they just called it the Master System 2 to be confusing.
Correct. We did get it, but however, all the American ones come with Alex Kidd. That's the thing. All it's the ones that are overseas that some of them have Sonic 1.
Okay, okay.
Because again, Sonic 1 didn't really, I mean, we'll talk about that when we get to the games, but Sonic 1 didn't really make that much of a splash over here in the US on the Master System, which is unfortunate because I love it dearly.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
I totally get though why it didn't, because it's like when I first saw so this is an actual story. This is a true story. When I first found out that Sonic the Hedgehog was also on the Master System, I thought it was just a ROM hack, because I was like, why would they have made Sonic for the Master System? Like, this is weird. Like, why did like this? I mean, my first thought was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like a fan did this, but when I found it was legit, I was like, well, that's odd. And so it totally makes sense, because you can imagine parents back then be like, no, you already have, like, if you're gonna get Sonic, you're gonna get it for the newer system. Like, you're not gonna get it for the older system. Not to say that the game on the Master System is bad. It's different. But it. I could totally see parents and even kids being like, I want the newer one, the Genesis one.
Right.
So I'm not surprised that it didn't do as well as its Genesis counterpart. I believe the Genesis did. I don't know if this is. I heard somewhere that maybe the Master System version came out before the Genesis. I don't think that's correct, right? Am I
No,
just
it's not.
misremembering? That's what I thought. I thought I was misremembering something. Um, but one last thing in terms of the games, there is we've talked about it a lot, and kind of nebulously, but there was the card port. So there was two different types of games that you could get for your Sega Master System. You would have your standard cartridges, which just for lack of a better explanation, just think of it like a normal NES cartridge. They look different, but like obviously the types of games that you would get on those cartridges are similar to that of the NES. The Sega cards were much more bite-sized, and they were about the cards themselves were about the size of a credit card, and you could just pop it in on the front, and they were very small games. But I don't know much else about them. What do you know about the Sega cards?
Well, the Sega cards really weren't that big over in Europe and whatnot. They were mainly within like Japan and America. Those are the big things about that. But the main downside that with the cards were cool and all, but I guess they couldn't get the technology quite right like NEC and like the TurboGrafx did when they came out with their Hue cards. Because one of the biggest problems that Sega had was just that they couldn't get the right amount of data. Like there's a significant difference in the amount of like and how big of a game that you could put on the Sega card versus one on an actual cart. And so I think over time they probably just realized, hey, this was neat, but unfortunately it's restricting what we could do with these games. So because of
Yeah.
that, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I've also heard that many of the games, because I only have one Sega card game. I have Spy versus Spy. And most of the other games I've actually played either through other means, but that's the only one I've actually played on physical card. If I remember, I think I played Ghost House 2 back in the day, but I don't have it. But from what I've
Okay.
read, many of those card games don't actually have endings, which is weird. So why would you
Huh.
release that in that format knowing that there isn't they had to remove the ending or you couldn't fit the ending on there? I'm like, what? Why?
That's so
So
weird.
it is. It's an odd decision, and they're neat. They're neat, but I think overall, yeah, if that really was the issue, then it's probably the right decision for them to move away from the cards.
I do think it's kind of cool. I was just I'm reading on Sega Retro right now, the power base converter that you mentioned before. And just to be clear, listeners, the power base converter was an add-on to the Genesis that you would just pop it on the top to play your Master System games.
Yep,
Um, but the power base converter also had a card slot
that is
for
correct.
this. That's pretty cool. That's I mean, it makes sense, because if you want to play your old Master System games on the new Genesis, you would need to have that built-in functionality. But considering it was such a small thing and apparently it wasn't that popular in the first place, I'm surprised Sega was even like willing to include it.
I think they were just trying to grasp that little tiny bit of the market that had the Master System and say, hey, go ahead and upgrade and get our system. This isn't going to cost you that much. You can buy this converter, and now all of your Master System games will work on the Genesis.
It's a
I
smart
really think that's what
choice.
it is. That was a good move on their part. I mean, I know they didn't make it for too terribly long, but
Mhm.
it was still a good move on their part. But that's why I generally tell people too who want to get into actually playing Master System on original hardware and I normally they ask me like, what's the best way to play Master System? Really, I say really the best way if you don't get the original Master System one, probably the best way to do is that because most likely you have a Genesis. If you can get a power base converter, that's really the best way to do it. If you're going to do it on original hardware, because the games all play the same, you can play cartridges and you can play cards. You can use a Genesis controller. You can toss the Master System one in the bin. You can use the Genesis controller, perfectly fine, and you can get RGB out if you have a Genesis one or two. So there you
Yeah.
go. Actually, it doesn't even work with the Genesis 3, so that's not even a point. So yeah, it's like the power base converter for me is really, it's to me, it's the best way to play Master System games on original hardware.
I did not know about this. Just reading on about the Sega cards. Also, I feel like I've heard of this thing before, but Sega also made a computer called the Sega Ai Computer, and the cards also worked on that.
Really, that I didn't know.
Yeah, apparently
That's
it
cool.
worked. That's kind of a cool little crossover. It's according to Sega Retro, it's an extremely rare computer released in Japan by Sega in '86. The unit was seen to be ahead of its time upon release, though it did not sell in large numbers. And I won't continue to read the rest of Sega Retro. You can go do that yourself if you are so inclined. That's nuts, though. I did see a video somewhat recently. I'm going to see if I can find it again of someone who, I don't know if it was a Sega AI computer, but I think it was one of Sega's computers, and they were like using it. Like they showed that it was still working and stuff.
I'm not surprised. That's
I
actually pretty awesome.
I don't know if I think I retweeted it, but that might have been like 2 years ago, and I don't feel like going back through my tweets to find that. I don't remember if I did it or not. I think I retweeted that, but okay. Any other thoughts on this before we talk about some of the games?
I don't believe so. I think we've pretty much covered, for the most part, as far as like the hardware itself. The only other thing that I can think of is basically digging more into the Brazilian side of the Master System, which we already talked about. Because there was one other iteration of the Master System that came out in Japan. It was called the Master System Compact. Not Japan. I'm sorry, in Brazil. It was called the
Okay.
Master System Compact, where essentially it wirelessly transmitted like audio and video through an RF connection. It was really cool. But
What?
yeah, it's really cool. It didn't last for very long, and there's like a blue version and a pink version that they called the Master System Compact Girl. What? So
That's pretty
honestly,
cool.
I want these in my life somehow, some way.
I know,
It's
right?
like that's really cool. But I mean, of course, they'll never work. But it's still
Once
really cool to
again,
see.
man, we were talking before about Sega's like innovation. Like you look at the Game Gear had a TV tuner and shit like that.
Yes.
Like I know the game. We're not talking. Oh, I need to do a
Well, the
Game
thing
Gear
is that we're talking
episode.
about Game Gear though, because of course there's going to be parallels between the Master System and the Game
Both
Gear
eight
because
bit
they're
consoles. Yeah.
yeah, their hardware is almost identical. Like as far as like the way that it goes, the hardware is almost identical. But the thing about it is that when you play a game on Game Gear, again, let's go back to Sonic. You play Sonic on the Game Gear versus Sonic on the Master System. By your first glance, you think it's the same game. Actually, no, it's not. Because the thing is,
Okay.
if you play Sonic on the Master System, you'll notice you see so much more of the field as you're playing, and it makes the game so much playable. To be completely honest, I'm not a fan of the Sonic games on the Game Gear for one specific reason. When you start moving fast, you can't see where you're going because you're on a square,
Your
small
screen is
screen.
so small.
And if
Yeah,
you're
you're
playing on
so
an
limited.
actual Game Gear, your screen's going to get ghosted too. So it makes it
Yeah.
really tough to see. But on the Master System, Sonic on the Master System, like in many other games, like Streets of Rage on the Master System, there's so many others that
I didn't
you
know
think it's
Streets
the
of
same
Rage
game.
got ported to them. Not ported, but I didn't know there was a version on the Master System.
Not only is there one, Streets of Rage 2 also got one as well.
Wow.
Yep,
Wow.
sure
Okay.
did. Sure did. Neither of
Is there
them
any
came to
difference?
America.
Is there any difference between those two versions?
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Which I mean, well, I mean, you want to go on to that, or we want to talk
Yeah,
about some of the
by
other
all
games
means. I
first?
mean, this is the games thing. Instead of, I don't want to like, if it's a specific game, I do episodes on like deep dives onto specific games. Like I'll spend an hour to an hour and a half going into a specific game. So when I do these console retrospectives, I like to talk about, it's kind of a lot more free flowing because I don't want to spend too much time on any one game because maybe I'll cover it in the future. You know, you
Okay.
never know.
Yeah.
But like we can still talk about stuff as long as we're not spending like 30 minutes on a single game type of thing.
Of course, of course. But yeah, so that's just kind of the Master System as a whole. Just like we talked about, There are what I think over 500 something games. I think on the or so 300, something like that. I don't know the exact number of how many games actually released on the Master System, but the interesting thing about it is that we only got roughly about, I'd say, a third, maybe even a fourth of all the Master System games that actually were released, because the majority of them were released in PAL territories, whether they were
Mm-hmm.
in Europe or Brazil. Like there are so, especially Brazil. Like there are some gems that are only available from Tectoy in Brazil, which I'm sure we're gonna get to that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
going in the Streets of Rage, though, yes, like a lot of people don't know that there's a Master System Streets of Rage. There's a lot of people that don't know that there's a Master System Jurassic Park, Aladdin, Batman Returns,
Wow.
Road Rash. All so many of these
Wow.
different games came out, but all of them, except for maybe like a handful of them, all of them were only in Europe. Another one, a Castle of Illusion. Like Castle of Illusion
Okay,
came
the
out on
Mickey
both.
Mouse game, yeah.
Yeah, it came out on both the Genesis and the Master System, but Master System also got a couple of other exclusives. They also got Land of Illusion, which was released over here in the Game Gear, but it also got Master System and PAL. The Lucky Dime Caper, starring Donald Duck, another one. Deep Duck Trouble. Both of those came out on the Master System overseas, but not in America. But we got them on Game Gear.
Huh.
So there's always that parallel between like Game Gear and Master System that people will think that they're the same, but they're not. And then the thing is about the Master System too, many of those other games also have the FM sound capability, which we didn't quite talk about that. That if you use the FM sound capability, the sound actually, the music and the sound that comes from it is closer to Genesis quality sound. So there are a few games that have that, like Fantasy Star, for example. Like it
Mhm.
has a completely different soundtrack if you listen to it that way versus listening to it in the original Master System sound. I forgot what the exact terminology is for it, but
FM
synth, yeah,
synthesis. I can't say the word for some reason.
yes, exactly. So there are differences there, but then if you look at a game on the Game Gear and you see it on the Master System, by all means play it on the Master System, because you'll see a huge difference. And yeah, like I said, Sonic is probably the biggest difference that you can
And you
show
don't
on
have
it.
to waste a shitload of batteries or find a Genesis 2 power cord to plug into your Game Gear.
That is correct.
God damn, that thing takes so many batteries just to operate.
Yep, 6, and
And
then they're done. They're done in
and
what,
done
2
in like 2
hours?
hours.
Yeah. If you're
That
lucky, you'll
thing
get 2 hours out of it.
that thing was just a battery thing ate batteries like it was Thanksgiving every day. I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know where that analogy was going, but um,
All you can quaff. That's what it is with like with the Game Gear. It's like, geez, you put the batteries in, and yeah, you might get 2 hours. You might only get 1 hour. It's really all depends.
it's the most unportable. That's a lie. The most unportable portable console, quote unquote portable, would be the
What, the
Virtual
Virtual
Boy.
Boy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we both are on the
Um,
same wavelength there. Like,
yeah,
yep.
that's the most unportable portable console. But like the Game Gear almost was, because you can only really use it for, if you're lucky, like you said, 2 hours, or if you want to plug it in. You're sitting by an outlet. Isn't that fun?
Right. And once
Isn't that
again, it's
fun
like
for?
that was Sega once again just taking it to Nintendo and just really saying, "Hey, we're going to come up with this," and they came up with something that's, again, from a technology standpoint, better than what Nintendo was offering. But Nintendo had the support. That was the things, like they really
Well,
had the
and
support,
it
and they
just
had
it.
that strangleholds and everything that we
Mhm.
talked about earlier.
Well, it just
But
made it was much more consumer friendly for the Game Boy because the battery life. That's I
correct.
would argue that probably killed the Game Gear more than anything else, and the price. Obviously, the price was a lot higher because of the advanced stuff they had in the Game Gear.
Right, but I bet if they actually were able to get that battery life situation, people probably would have paid the extra money. I bet.
Probably,
Just to get
probably.
a backlit colored screen.
I
Yeah.
would agree with you. Backlit, full color. I mean, you didn't see that from a Nintendo handheld in North America until the early 2000s. In Japan, they had the Game Boy
Game Boy
Color
Light.
Light or whatever. But anyway, yeah. So some of the other games, and I don't know, should we continue talking about the games, or do you want to talk about Tectoy in Brazil? Because I don't know much about it other than that's the company that distributed the Master System in Brazil, and they continue to make it today. Should we go? What do you think? Should we go into more of the games, or should we dive into Tectoy a bit?
Oh, we can talk about Tectoy for a bit, because
All
I
right, let's
mean
do.
it's not a huge amount that we could talk about, but yeah. So Tectoy basically was Sega's distributor in Brazil, and they took the ball with it and they ran with it. Like essentially, the majority of games that were released over there were released through Tectoy. But what many people don't know is that they also had their handful of Brazilian exclusives. And these are
Mm-hmm.
officially licensed games. And when people look at them, they think that they might actually be, it's like, oh, this is either a ROM hack or a bootleg or something like that. No, no, no. These are officially licensed games. And some of them will basically blow your mind. Like, for example, did you know there's a Street Fighter 2 for the Master System?
I did not. Brazil only, though, I'm
Yep.
assuming then.
Brazil
Okay.
only. Brazil only Master System exclusive. There are a few iterations of Sonic that were over there. Sonic Blast, which was originally also known as G Sonic in Japan. It was a Game Gear game that Tectoy got the exclusive port of it over to Master System. Dynamite
Okay.
Headdy on the Genesis got, I mean, it's also on the Game Gear, but it got an exclusive port to the Master System in Brazil. There's a Woody Woodpecker game that was built from the ground up for both the Genesis,
Wow.
Master System, and well, both the Genesis and the Master System. That's also not available over here, but probably one of the biggest ones, and I know it's not quite Master System, but one of the biggest ones that's real Tectoy is really infamous for is that they have an officially licensed Duke Nukem 3D for the Mega Drive. And
What?
yep,
Duke Nukem
oh,
3D, like wow.
yep.
Okay.
Tectoy
Okay.
exclusive, and it had a 3D Realms blessing and everything. It's not the best game in the world. It's not,
I believe it.
but it's very impressive. I can really say that. It's not a great game, but looking at it, it's impressive to see how smooth they actually got it to run on Mega Drive hardware. I'm like, that's pretty sick. You know, that
That's
they did that.
nuts.
But X-Men Mojo World. That's another one. Ariel the Little Mermaid. There's a couple of other exclusive ones that they put out just in Brazil, and it's neat. It's actually really neat. But
That's
they're
pretty
gonna run
awesome.
you. Earthworm Jim, that's another one. That's another one. Virtual Fighter Animation, Mortal Kombat 3. There's a Battletoads game for it as well. Yeah,
Oof.
Battletoads and Battle Maniacs actually streamed that on Twitch. It's rough. It's a rough
I bel
port. But
I believe it.
yeah,
So,
it's kind of crazy on that.
it's kind of awesome to see that it was just so popular. And that's, I was saying, I don't actually remember anymore if I said it during our recording, or I know I said it off mic though, or if it was off mic I should say. But like I would love to, if I have any Brazilian listeners out there who grew up with the Master System from Tectoy, please reach out to me, stillloadingcontact@gmail.com, or any social media at stillloadingpod. I would love to talk to you and have you on the show to, as almost like an addendum to this episode, because it's, as much as G and I here love the Master System, like, you seem to have a little bit more of an emotional connection to it than I do, but like, even so, neither of us really had a strong childhood connection to it. At least from, correct me if I'm wrong though. Do you feel like you did? Am I, or did I misinterpret your story or anything?
Oh no, you got the story right. Like I didn't
Okay.
really have a childhood connection. I didn't really start digging into the Master System until well into my time with the Genesis. That's when I
That's,
really started getting into it.
yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to put words in your mouth just in
Oh
case I
no,
was
you're
wrong
good.
with that.
No, you're
But
good. You're good.
yeah, but any Brazilian listeners, if I have any, and you love the Master System, I would love to learn more about what it was like growing up with it at the time, because uh both G and I were from the US, so we have such a strictly North American view. We can talk about what we know from other releases and what things were like from that we can read online, but we didn't experience it firsthand. So if there's anyone out there listening, I would love to talk to you about it. But okay, uh moving on to some of the other games as well. Some of the ones that I like to highlight is just that ones that I'm interested in, I should say, but I don't know much about. That's what I would like to say, I guess. Zillion.
Yes.
Zillion looks like it, from what I understand, it's like the closest thing to Metroid that the Master System had. I don't know if that's it. It's not like Metroid, but it's like the closest thing they had to it. I don't know if that's true or not, though.
I could see the parallels in that. Like, I can see how people could see that it's kind of like a Metroid. It's a lot more straightforward. So
Okay.
then, but it plays something similar like Metroid, but it doesn't have that sort of kind of trekking your way through a map and trying to find different things as Metroid does. So it's a little bit easier to jump into. But I actually really like Zillion a lot as well. Like it's a great game. It's also based off an anime. which many
That's what I
people
was about
don't
to
know that
say.
too. Yep.
It's a licensed game technically. There's an anime for it, which
Yep.
I've never watched. I've never watched that anime or
You, you,
whatever, but
I haven't seen it either. You know, I have it. I actually bought because Funimation released it
you
on
have
Blu-ray
it.
here in the US. It's like I have it, but I still haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet.
Oh man, if only you know what sucks. Like I understand why they do it, but wouldn't it be fun to watch that on stream and then play Zillion right afterwards just
Oh,
to
that would be
see?
slick.
But you know that you would get copyright strike like
Oh,
almost immediately.
totally, totally. No,
Oh,
it's
that
okay.
would.
We do it on Discord.
There
Do
you
it on
go.
Discord and then do it on Twitch.
It's a smart way to do it. I like that. I'll have to join your Discord just for that. Then, if you do that,
Yeah, we
that'd
should
be
start doing watch parties like that for sure. I would totally do that.
just think about it. Like you could do the ones where it's like you would then you would do it like all the license stuff. You would watch an anime together on Twitch, or it's not Twitch. I'm sorry, Discord, and then you could either stream it on Discord and Twitch or something like that, and then you would stream the game and just talk about like and see how close it is to the source material or
Right,
something
right.
like that.
Now, real
Yeah,
quick, before we dig more into any games, can we talk about box art for a little bit? Because
of
I
course,
didn't even
yes, that
talk
is a
about
very
that.
good point. I hate the box art for this personally, but
I agree. The US, the North American box arts for the majority of Sega's games for the Master System in the US are frankly they're terrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the white grid. But it's what they add on top of the white grid for most of those games makes no sense to me. And I thought about that because I pulled up Zillion real quick and I wanted to take a look at the box art for it. And
box
sure enough,
art's
it's like
not
there it
great.
is. It looks like a microwave. I know what it is. It's a computer terminal because I played the game. But if you've never played the game, it's like, okay, you look at it, it looks like a microwave. What is this even supposed to be?
It's not. They did not. It's so interesting to me that some of the lessons that these companies learned from each other back then, because one of the reasons the Nintendo or in the NES, like the earliest games on the NES, they used the actual sprites as the cover art was because with the Atari, there was so many shitty games that came out and everyone was duped into them because the box art was really cool looking, but the game
Yep.
was nothing like the box art. It didn't even look anything close. They understandably people were pissed. So Nintendo, to combat that, I think pretty smartly just put the game's graphics right on the box.
Oh
Just
yeah.
showed you exactly what it was. Now Sega still had an element of this because you could still see screenshots of the game on the back of the box, but the front of it just was not appealing in the slightest.
Absolutely. And then some of them are just strange. Like I think was Action Fighter. I think it was Action Fighter, where it looks like just you're looking at a road and it's like a magnifying glass over it or something like that. And then there's like pro wrestling where there's like a guy that has like a headless wrestler that has a head without a body and a headlock. I'm like, what? What even is this? It's weird. Granted, they got better. They did get better later on because then they would have the white grid and then they would have essentially what looked to be the same box art as the Genesis version, like Sonic, perfect example. So or James Buster Douglas boxing is like so they look better, but at the same token,
Wait,
by that time,
what
it's
was
like I
that?
think people were already disengaged. What James?
James Douglas?
Oh, James Buster Douglas boxing,
Okay.
which was
I
a big seller for the Genesis. And a lot of people don't know. That's another one. A lot of people don't know that there's a Master System version. It was a very low print run game, and it is crazy expensive now. And it's a completely different game.
That's
But
so weird. That's
here's a
so
fun
weird.
fact about this too. That game was reskinned not once but twice. So it's known in PAL areas as heavyweight boxing. It's just called heavyweight champ. I'm sorry. It's called heavyweight champ, and then George Foreman's KO boxing, which is the same game, but it's reskinned. I'm like, what? That's so
Actually,
weird.
and thinking of reskins, this is a good time to bring this up. I did like an Instagram video on this like a year and a half, 2 years ago. But the Wonderboy series, that's also a huge that's a huge Master System. And Alex Kidd. How could we forget about Alex
Oh,
Kidd?
Alex Kidd.
He was the
Yeah.
mascot. I've not played an Alex Kidd game. I've heard mixed reviews. It's people who I've heard more people who are nostalgic for it really like it, but people who didn't grow up with it don't really enjoy it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Alex Kidd before I go into the whole Wonder Boy thing I was going to talk about?
Oh, yes, please. So I didn't grow up with Alex Kidd. You want to know what the funny thing is that I'm going to break some hearts by saying this, but my first experience with Alex Kidd was Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle on the Genesis. And
Okay.
as a kid, I hated it. hated it. Like I could not stand it. Like when I played, because I played Sonic first, right? So it's
Mhm.
like coming after Sonic and then going and playing that. And I was like, what is this? And it's not a great game. Even today, it is not a great game. But then I went back and I played Alex Kidd in Miracle World on Master System, and that's a great game. Like
Okay,
to me, it's like
okay.
Alex Kidd, as long as you avoid the Genesis one, because in America there's really there's Alex Kidd in Miracle World. There's one called Alex Kidd the Lost Stars, which is based off an arcade game called Alex Kidd the Lost Stars. I like the Lost Stars because it's kind of like I'm not going to call it an auto runner because you still have to kind of move from left to right, but you could tell that it was based off of an arcade game. It's not a traditional Mario style platformer like Alex Kidd Miracle World is. But I
Okay.
think that that's a good game. Then there's Alex Kidd in High Tech World, which is a reskin of like a Japanese point and click style adventure game or story driven adventure game that they reskinned to Alex Kidd for some reason.
Interesting. So
Didn't
it's
care
not
for
even the
that.
same game genre.
No, no. And then Miracle World just recently got a yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was about to say the wrong thing. Yeah, Alex Kidd in Miracle World did just recently get a remake. Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, which is a good little remake, but
Okay.
I will say this that if you're not a big fan of the original, you're not going to like the remake. However, there is one Alex Kidd game that stands head and shoulders above the rest, and I love it dearly. And that's Alex Kidd in Shinobi World on Master
Okay.
System. It's awesome. Like, it is an awesome game. But the thing is that, and I get this all the time, is it awesome because it's an Alex Kidd game, or is it awesome because it's a Shinobi game? Like, is it an Alex Kidd game or is it a Shinobi game? I'm like, it's more of a Shinobi game, if that
So
makes
it's
sense.
it's
It's
it's a
kind
little
of
bit better for because of the Shinobi elements in it. Okay.
yeah, because it feels more like a Shinobi game, but it's like I highly recommend playing that one. In my opinion, it's one of the best games on the system. Like it's great.
Good to know. What I was going to say about Wonderboy to reference back to a little bit ago, the Wonderboy games are obviously super popular. The what is it? Wonderboy the Dragon's
Dragon
Trap,
Trap,
arguably considered the best game in the series.
I'd say
Uh,
so.
I've never played any of them. I have one Wonderboy game, but what's interesting is Wonderboy. It started out as an arcade game. The original Wonderboy was an arcade game, and
Correct.
it got ported. Wonderboy, have you ever looked at the web tree of of what happened with Wonderboy? And like
Oh yeah.
so
It's like a Charlie Day meme sort of spider web of different things with the Wonder Boy
yes.
franchise and whatnot. So
Yeah, pretty much. So Wonderboy, I did a video on Instagram. I'm gonna see if I can find it real quick just so I can understand so I can remember it. I had a picture of it a while ago, but I can't remember where it's at now. But basically, it's just kind of nuts because Wonder Boy got ported. Right, it started out as I have it now. Wonder Boy the arcade game. It got ported to the Game Gear, but it was called Revenge of Drancon. I
yes.
don't know why, but sure. Then it was also ported to the NES, but when it got ported to the NES, it was called Adventure Island, and
Yep.
that started the whole Adventure Island series, which I will not go into. But but then you had the sequel to Wonder Boy, which I'm trying to get over into the video here to see if I can see it because once again I don't have that. There we go. Then you have Wonder Boy in Monsterland, the arcade game, which I believe did show up on the Master System as well, right? Wonder
Yes,
Boy in
yes, it did.
Monsterland. There is this is an interesting one. So there's two different ports of that there is one called Bikuramon World, which is the PC Engine port, and then there was a port but with like some visual modifications to the Famicom called Sayuki World,
Yes.
and then there was a sequel to that port, that modified port called Sayuki World 2, which made it over to the US. So Sayuki World 1 never came to the US and Sayuki World 2 did, but we call it Wampum.
Oh, that's why. Oh, I just played that.
Isn't that nuts?
Okay, that makes sense. It makes sense now because I actually just streamed that the other night, last week actually, and I was like, okay, I said that in the chat. I was like, this feels an awful lot like a Wonder Boy style game, and it's like,
It's
and now it
because it
makes
is a
sense.
Wonder Boy game. It's literally the sequel to Wonder Boy, technically Wonder Boy 2, because they don't once again with naming conventions, they just don't do them. Then I'm trying to see here because I have to scroll through the video. So then what's weird about this is that there's two sequels to Wonder Boy in Monsterland. There is or a sequel that stayed in the arcade. It only is one that's all it is. It's Wonderboy 3 Monster Lair, and it's an arcade game. It never got ported anywhere else as far as I'm aware. But then the sequel, like the home console sequel, it's a different game. You have Wonderboy 3 The Dragon's Trap, which is considered the best one, right? But it was also known in Japan, I guess, as Monster World 2 The Dragon's Trap. But that was for the Sega Mark III. So in North America, it was Wonderboy 3 The Dragon's Trap. And in Japan, under the Sega Mark III, it was Monster World 2 The Dragon's Trap. And then that game also got ported to a couple different places. It got ported to the Game Gear, which I'm currently covering with my finger, so I can't even see it on the video. So that doesn't help. It was just called The Dragon's Trap on Wonderboy The Dragon's Trap on Game Gear. And then once again, this console version of Wonderboy 3 got ported to the TurboGrafx 16 under the name of the Dragon's Curse.
Yep.
But it was also known as which, TurboGrafx 16 is what the North American name of the console is. The Japanese console is PC Engine. Same console, just different name. So on the North American version, it was called Dragon's Curse. The PC Engine, the Japanese version, it was called Adventure Island.
Yep.
But it has no bearing to the Adventure Island series.
Yep.
And then I'm going to stop it there because there's a sequel and it's super convoluted. But if you're interested, the video is from, let's see if it says when I posted this thing. I can't even see what date I posted this on. But if you go to my Instagram page at Still Loading Pod and you look at like the reels or whatever, you look at the video specific ones, how you can sort it that way. It's towards the you can see it right before a DS download station video. So if you're curious about that, without me going through, hopefully that actually made sense on audio medium.
It makes sense. There is one thing though.
Nuts.
Talking about a Wonderboy Monster Lair, right? That's the one that you said that actually didn't come home. It didn't actually get a prop on from the arcade.
There was I'm gonna have to go back to it again. I forget what it is already. So the third Wonderboy game, because you have Wonderboy in Monsterland, and then it got split out into two different ones. There was a Wonderboy 3 in the arcade and then a Wonderboy 3 on the home console. The Wonderboy 3 in the arcade, as far as I'm aware, never went anywhere. It didn't get ported anywhere, but I could be wrong with that.
Right, because the Wonderboy 3 Monster Lair, because as far as I know, like the actual arcade version of that, the only way to get that one home properly is on the Sega Astro City Mini. Because like the Astro City Mini does have it. Yeah. It has Monsterland and Monster Lair.
Okay,
And I got rekindled when I got my Astro City Mini, and I was rekindled with that. I was just like, dang, I forgot how good this game is. It's like it's really, really good.
That's nuts. Okay, that makes sense because isn't the Astro City Mini like it had like arcade ports and stuff like that?
Correct.
That's what I thought.
Great little micro console. It's just such a shame that it's in such a limited supply, but it's a great little console.
Oh, it's also unfortunately for a niche audience too.
Oh yeah. You're right. You are right about that.
So unfortunately with niche audiences, you're going to get people who buy it, but maybe not enough to warrant the production of it, which sucks because there's a lot of great stuff out there. Yeah, so there's just so many games. Fantasy Zone's another good game for the Master System. It's what some people would call a cute 'em up, where it's a shoot 'em up game, but everything's very cute and bubbly and lighthearted. And that one's interesting though because you can scroll left and right. It's not like a shooter where you're just in the style of like Raiden where you're going bottom to top or I'm trying to think of another really common shmup, but
like R-Type or Gradius.
Like R-Type or Gradius, where you're going left to right. This one, it's kind of like you have this set, not really open world, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of like what in like those sections in like Star Fox 64 where like you have a linear section and then you have this big open area where you fly around. It's kind of like that, but in a 2D space where you're just going left and right, back and forth, trying to take out targets. I don't have a lot of experience playing Master System games. The ones that I have played, like we talked about Double Dragon already, about that, how that was awesome and you could play two players on that. the Master System was also the first appearance of the Ys series. If you've ever played those RPGs, that's actually written as YS, but it's pronounced Ys because reasons. English, Japanese, I don't know who's to blame for that one. But it's I've played a little bit of that. The Ys games have really good music.
They do. They do. I was, and the thing is, I didn't actually get into Ys until like way, way later. The first game that I played was on Ys wasn't until what, the PSP. So
Okay.
I completely missed Ys as a kid.
Oh,
Completely,
same.
even the Genesis one, I didn't play until later.
I
So
still
I was
haven't
like,
played
yeah.
any of them. I just know they're a really popular series of RPGs.
hmm But they're still going today. But yeah, as you
Mm-hmm.
said, it's just got their humble beginnings in the Master System. So
It's the
yeah.
first time, at least that's the first time we saw it in the US or in North America. I believe they were originally like for the MSX or like a PC or something like that. I don't think they were originally a home console series. And I think they were designed for like a Japanese PC and then it was ported to a bunch of different consoles, but I'm not 100% certain.
I believe that. I believe that.
Shinobi's also a really good game.
Oh yeah, and
A
then that's
very
another
good
one. It's
game.
just like back and forth between like, okay, well, which one is better than NES and the Master System, because they are slightly different. It's like, again, and then to me, I actually prefer Shinobi on the Master System over the arcade, for one specific reason. And here's the irony behind this with me. It's just that
Okay.
I like the Master System version of Shinobi more than the arcade because you get a health bar. But my favorite Shinobi game is Shadow Dancer on the Genesis, where you die in one hit. That's
Okay,
the
yeah,
difference.
it's a little ironic. It's a little counterintuitive on that one.
Yep.
What are some
Oh, so good though. So
what
so
are
good.
some highlights for you though on the Master System?
Oh well, a lot of my highlights really comes down to some of the more offbeat ones that I've gotten a chance to try throughout the years. Again, it's like most of the ones that we got over here in America are all really good, but the ones that really stuck with me were the ones that were released overseas, like in PAL territories and whatnot. That I say that if you have a means to play them, play them. They're a little bit tough to get, but I guess I'll start with Sonic because, like, yeah, I am one of those. I am one of the weirdos out there, and I actually am working on a big project about like all the main Sonic games out there. And I think that one of my biggest things is just that I love the original Sonic on Master System so much. Like, to me, it is one of the best games in the entire franchise. I love the level design. I think the graphics and the animation are awesome. The music by Yuzo Koshiro, the
Hmm.
mastermind, did the music for Sonic 1, and it's great. Yes, you could die in one hit in the boss battles, but it's like, hey, just practice and you'll get there. And but it's just, to me, it's a wonderful experience. To me, I like it. Here it is. I like it more than Sonic 1 on the Genesis.
Wow.
As an
Wow.
adult, I actually like it more than Sonic 1 on the Genesis. Now, Sonic 2 is a
Okay.
little bit of a different story. Like, I love Sonic 2 Genesis. It's my favorite game in the entire franchise. And I think it's just the most overall well-built game in the entire franchise. Like, for me, it really is about Sonic 2. Sonic 2 on the Master System is really good too. I just feel that they went a little too hard in some of the gimmicks in some of the levels, like the bubbles in the water level, the hang gliding stage. And imagine that. I tried playing Sonic 2. Sonic 2 on the Game Gear is miserable. Like, I will say it right now, it actually is a miserable experience because between the stage layout, you really have to see what's in front of you, or you'll just die all over the place. And especially when you get the hang gliders, and then you get to the bubble stages and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know how. Like, I beat it as a kid. I tried playing it as an adult. I'm like, I don't know how I endured this. But then I played the Master System version, and it's much better. But the thing about Sonic 2 in the Master System, only overseas, not in America. Sonic Chaos, which was originally on the Game Gear, came out in the Master System, also not in America. And they did the exact same thing with that. Also plays like a champ. I talked about Sonic Blast already, and how it was only on the Master, but Sonic Blast is not a good game. Repeat, not a good game at all, at all. But it's just really neat that Brazil made an exclusive Sonic Blast, and it is the white whale of my Sonic collection. So one of the few games I don't own. It's like,
Is
yeah,
it expensive to get
it
too?
is obscenely expensive.
Of
So
course, because the freaking, especially now with the oh my god. You're a collector as well, so I know you felt the pain of collecting in a pandemic era.
oh yeah, yeah.
It's
It's just
just
Ooh, it breaks my
Peop-
heart, and
Well,
it's
I mean,
always been a tricky one to get. But now, especially now with the market, the collecting market, and the retro gaming market, the way that it is, it's like forget about it.
it's a double-edged sword, man, because more than ever video game history has been on the forefront. Like the Video Game History Foundation is doing wonderful work, and like they're getting a lot more notoriety, and like, getting a lot more like uh presence online, and people are understanding more about video game history. But the double-edged sword of that is that people are then using that to be like, well, let me jack up the price of every single thing,
Yep. Yep.
and it
No, it's crazy.
sucks.
Sonic Spinball is another one too that a lot of people don't know got on the Master System,
I
but
did not
that
know
one,
that either.
but that one's not a Brazilian exclusive. You can get it in Europe, or you can get in a European version for it as well. But it's also still kind of pricey and not worth it because it's a port of the Game Gear version, and the Game Gear Sonic Spinball is not great. But then there's like some of the others that I really like about too. Like, did you know that Ninja Gaiden has a Master System game?
I think I did know that. I did,
It's
yeah. I've seen
so
a
good.
video of the two of them being compared.
It is so good. The Master System Ninja Gaiden is, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the NES Ninja Gaiden too. But the Master System Ninja Gaiden is completely different story, completely different levels, completely different music. And I
Isn't it
have a
closer?
Brazilian tech toy copy, but it's all in English. So I was like, oh,
Oh,
okay. That's
that's
pretty neat.
handy. Was Ninja Gaiden an arcade game as well? I because
Correct.
so I'm assuming the Master System version is closer to the arcade game.
No. Actually,
The-
because the
oh,
arcade game is a beat 'em up. Like Ninja
oh,
Gaiden slash
God.
Shadow Warriors.
Okay, yeah,
The
yeah.
arcade game was a beat 'em up. But the funny thing about that is that Sega is actually working along with Tecmo to port the arcade game to the Mega Drive, and it got canceled literally as it was. I think it was like 98% complete, and they
Oh, what the
canceled it.
fuck?
There is a ROM out there. Like if you want to find it, it's out there. But yeah, it was like 98% complete, and they canceled it. But the Master System version plays more akin to the NES version, but it's
Okay.
completely original. Like the Game Gear Ninja Gaiden, also completely original. So I'm just like, I recommend checking them all out. I mean, like they're all pretty great.
I think what I'm learning the most from this episode, like I've before doing this episode, I did know a little bit about how Master System was more popular in Brazil, and like the Sega cards and all this others, and just some of the more basic stuff, I guess. But like what I'm learning now is just how many different, you can't call them ports because they're not the same game, but how many other different versions of existing Genesis or arcade games wound up on Master System, but not as direct ports, but as completely unique new experiences in and of
Yep.
themselves. Like
Yep.
that's just wild to me, and it kind of is painting a bit more of a picture as to why the Master System didn't do as well in North America, because once again, like I mentioned before, like why would I play Sonic the Hedgehog on the Master System when there's a newer version out for the Genesis? Why would I play Streets of Rage on the Master System when the newer, more pretty graphics version is out on the Genesis? So I can totally see if like a good, I don't know what percentage of the library is those, not ports, like I said, but those different versions of existing Genesis slash arcade games. I could totally see if there's a decent percentage of the library is that, I could totally see why it didn't do as well.
Oh yeah, because they probably confused the market there. And that's really the only downside about that. But yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about that because again, these are all really pals. So Ninja Gaiden is one example. There are several others. Another one that immediately comes to mind is Aladdin. So like Disney's Aladdin, it also came out in America and in America on the Genesis and on the Game Gear. And if you played a Game Gear version, that is an auto runner. It basically is like a side-scrolling auto roll. It's mostly an auto runner. There are some
Okay.
stages that are more of a traditional kind of side-scrolling
Interesting.
platformer.
Interesting.
It's a fantastic game, and it's also a beautiful game. Like it's one of the best looking games on the Master System. Like the parallax scrolling, you can kind of see like when you're hopping, like on the stage when you're with Jasmine, you're hopping on top of the rooftops. You can
Hmm.
almost see like the pseudo 3D kind of shift whenever you're hopping from building to building. It's really cool how it's done. It is on the Master System, but again, only in PAL areas, and they
Of
did
course.
just an outstanding job. Batman Returns. Batman Returns is another one. Now, this is one that I didn't even know. Like I knew about it on Game Gear, but I'd never played it on Game Gear. I didn't know about the Master System version until like so before I started doing my own YouTube channel, I was co-hosting on another YouTube channel called I Retro Gamer. Tyler Esposito. He runs his own channel now called My Retro Life. But we did a video
Okay.
together talking about Batman Returns games, and we were going to meet up and just like, okay, well, we're going to talk about the Genesis, we're going to talk about the Sega CD ones, which I'm familiar with. And it's like, oh yeah, we can talk about the Master System version too. And I looked at him and was like, there's a Master System version?
What?
It was like, yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of a port of the Game Gear game, but the difference between that is that the Game Gear version gives you a health bar and you also can store your weapons. Like you can store your weapons and you get a health bar. But I still like the Master System version more because it's like, yeah, you die in one hit, but the stage layout and being able to see roughly everything and just the graphics and the music on Batman Returns Master System is so good. Like the soundtrack is one of the best on the entire system. I loved it when I streamed it earlier this year. Like I felt it all over again because like this game is freaking awesome. Be patient with it. It's really easy to rage quit on this game because it's hard, especially when you get to the boss battles and again dying in one hit. But it's so good, so very good. Jurassic Park, another example. Like Jurassic Park on the Master System is completely different from the Genesis one. I think it's better. Like to me, like
Okay.
The Genesis one, it's neat because of how it looks and everything. But playing it, especially when you play as Dr. Grant, playing it could be a real slog. But the Master System version, it plays like a real champ. Like it's a great game, but only available in no actually it wasn't a Tech Toy exclusive, but it was available in Brazil and in Europe for the Master System as well. But and then I already talked about Castle of Illusion, like the whole Disney trifecta that's on the Master System. But probably one of the biggest travesties that we didn't get in the US that they got in Europe on PAL areas. Are you familiar with a game called Master of Darkness?
I am not.
Okay, it's also known as Vampire Master of Darkness on Game Gear because we
Okay.
did get it in the US. It is basically a Castlevania clone, but it is a really good Castlevania clone with outstanding
Okay.
graphics, excellent music. It's a lot of fun to play. The boss fights are really fun, and it's just such a shame that we didn't get this in the US. It's a real shame because it's a fantastic game, and I bet it would have done super well over here. But
But we did
alas,
get it on the
unfortunately,
Game Gear.
we did get it for the Game Gear though, so at least we got it in that sense. But man, it's just when I think about the Master System, it's just so much potential that the system really could have had over here if Nintendo didn't have such a big stranglehold and if Sega really had a little bit more marketing power. I think it would have done so much better. But then you really have to think about that. If the Master System did so much better, would it have really delayed the Genesis? How much would that have really changed history? You know?
I know, right? And the Genesis is like really where Sega made its name. Like, don't
It
get me wrong,
is.
I'm not nothing against the Master System, but the Genesis is where slash
Oh,
Mega Drive is, where Sega became Sega,
oh no,
like as we know it now.
there's no mincing words on that. I mean, like the Genesis made Sega. It without a doubt they made Sega.
Now, I want to ask your opinion on this. What do you think? I think one of the, at least in my opinion, I don't think it was Sega's fault because I'm not saying they should have known better at the time, but I think one of Sega's things was that they were trying to bring the arcade experience home. Like if you look at Nintendo, you look at the NES and Super Nintendo, a lot of the games designed for the NES and Super Nintendo were meant to be console experiences, like home console experiences. They still had their arcade ones, like Ghosts and Goblins and Double Dragon and stuff, and Ninja Gaiden to an extent. But like a lot of times, the most popular games on Nintendo consoles were games that you could only play on a home console. RPGs, like Zelda, Super Mario Brothers. Though I know there's Mario in the arcade, but it's a little bit different. But Sega really seemed to push because they were really big into the arcade, unlike Nintendo. Nintendo had their hits, but they got out of the arcade game pretty quickly, and Sega stuck with it. And I feel like Sega really pushed having the arcade experience in their home, like in the home. And I don't, maybe I'm trying to determine how much of it is just my preference in gaming, or was it a smart decision? Like, I don't know I feel like it was smart at the time, but it was good for a short term gain, but it didn't help them out of the long run. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm kind of going with this anymore, but I think because what I was trying to, in my mind, here's what I was to kind of sum it up. And this ties in with Sega, I promise. The PSP. One of the
Mm,
reasons the PSP did pretty well, but didn't outsell the DS, is while it had some great original games, and obviously it had a lot of functionality with music and the UMDs and stuff like that, it was a lot of PS2 games ported over to it. It's like here, and it was like here now you can play Gran Turismo on your PSP. Here now you can play, um, you know, I can't think of some other. It was just always some type
Oh,
of. It was almost like ports. It weren't exactly ports, but it was
yeah.
almost like
Well,
ports.
it's like Ratchet and Clank and like God of War and many of the other the big titles
Well,
that they had
they
they were able
made
to bring in.
they
You know,
made unique, but Ratchet and Clank and God of War, those were all original titles for the PSP. They
that's
weren't just
that's
direct
true.
ports.
They weren't.
But I feel like overall, Sony did a lot of ports of PS2 games. Like here's your Gran Turismo 2, or well, 2 was on the PS1, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it felt like they were trying to sell it by like here is your same PS2 games, but but portable. And I don't think that's the smartest like marketing mentality, because it's like I understand you want to make your games portable, but like why would I buy a game again that I already own, type of thing. And I feel like Sega kind of did that, at least with the Master System, not so much with the Genesis, because the Genesis, like, they brought a lot of arcade games over, and it makes sense because you literally, like, you don't people don't own arcade games in their house by and large, at least back then. So like, I don't know. Like, I wonder how much of it their marketing bit them in the butt, because they, instead of focusing on unique content that you could only experience on the console, they focused on porting arcade games. That's what I'm trying to get at. And that was a very long roundabout way to get to that. What
I
do you
got you.
think of that, though? Do you think I'm kind of correct, or you think I'm off? I don't know. I don't really know even where I stand on it.
I think really you're correct to an extent, but I think really where it started faltering is a little bit later than what you think it is. Like I think
Okay.
really we're on the Genesis side, them sticking around to the hey, we want to bring the arcade experience home. I think it actually worked out super well for them in the 16-bit era because it kept them separate from Nintendo. Because the Nintendo was more of the original experience. It's like, hey, we played these games in the arcade, now you can play them at home. But the thing is that arcade games at that, especially that particular point in time, they have a very short life compared to like console games. So it's like you drop in maybe $5 to $10 worth of quarters, or however, if you're really, I mean, depending on how good you are at the game, and you can beat the entire game. Now imagine taking that and then spending $50 when you get home for it. Now you can have it anytime you want. You get your fill, and it's like, okay, well, I'm good. That's why Sonic was the game to really break the mold for Sega. And
Hmm.
then they realized, okay, well, this is what people want, and then now they're starting making more and more original games, kind of like that. So when we got Streets of Rage, it's when we got other stuff like Rice Star and whatnot. It's like we got that because of that. I can tell you where it faltered. It faltered in the Sega Saturn. That's
Yeah,
where it
that's
started
a
faltering.
that's a story for a different day. Of course, that is a
Right.
long, arduous thing of not Nintendo. I'm sorry, what
What
Sega did
Sega?
to kill themselves with the Saturn.
Right, because they went back to that mentality of bringing the arcade experiences home, but the arcades at that point had started getting much more advanced, and the Saturn couldn't quite catch up. Meanwhile, the PS1 basically was replicating these arcade experiences like Ridge Racer and Tekken and all that. But meanwhile, Sega was kind of struggling. Their original versions of Virtual Fighter and Virtual Fighter itself was not good, like on the Saturn. So they didn't quite catch Daytona USA. Well, I feel Daytona USA was fine. It definitely was paling in comparison. It's like, say, Outrun in the arcade versus Outrun on the Genesis. That's a really good conversion. Like that actually is a really, really good conversion. So people believe that. Now take Virtual Fighter in the arcade, you bring it, which is already kind of a lesser niche name to begin with, and you bring it to the Saturn. Yeah, it
Hmm.
didn't quite catch that, and they held on to that for so long. But by the time they realized it, Sony had already, they'd already left them in the dust. So
Yeah,
yeah, and it was too late. Poor Saturn. But yeah, but that's a discussion for another time. I love the Saturn dearly too. So I mean, like, I would definitely be down to talk about that another time. But I think,
I'd love to
but
have you
going
on
with
for it.
what you said though, I would say yes. I think it did kind of hurt them, but I don't think it hurt them as quickly as the Genesis era. I think it really didn't affect them until they hit 32-bit. Like
I
once they hit
think
Saturn, then it hurt them.
I think you're right. I think I think that's where I'm conflating my personal preference of games in with it, because I love my Sega, but like I think one of the reasons it's harder for me to go back and play games on the Genesis and the Master System is that I like more home console style experiences, and there's a lot of arcade style games on the Genesis, and that's not like I didn't there weren't a lot of arcades near me. And
Okay.
by the time I even started going to arcades, it was like I remember it was on a field trip in the first time I'd actually seen like a giant arcade, like an absolutely big one, was in an amusement park because we didn't really have any near where I lived. Like the only ones you could go to were an amusement park, and as a kid, you don't go to them all that often. Like you go to them fairly often, but if your parents don't take you into the arcade section, they take you on the rides. You're not going into the arcade.
Yep, Worlds
So
of Fun, Kansas City, Missouri.
like I had no idea there was even an arcade in some amusement parks because my parents would never take me there. Like like we just never walked in there, type of thing. And I remember I was on a field trip that we went to a amusement park near us, and my friends spent all day playing arcade games in the arcade. And I was like, why are you guys doing that? Like, you can play games at home. Like, why are you? It just went over my head that there are certain experiences that you can't get in the home that you can get in the arcade. But at the time, I was just much more naive. And so I feel like that mentality, though, of not really getting to experience a lot of arcade games, not getting to experience a lot of nostalgia for those games, has hurt my love of the Genesis. And not as much as the Master System because I don't have as much memories of it. But it's like when I'm looking for more games that appeal to me on the Genesis, it's harder for me to find
I
because
totally understand that.
it's so steeped in its arcade heritage.
Yep, I totally understand that. And I think that's also one of the other reasons why when people who grew up with Nintendo, who grew up with Super Nintendo, and they really want to dig into the Genesis, they have a little bit of a harder time for it because what's Nintendo mainly like on the Super NES? What were some of the bigger things, some of our big genres that we're really known for? Adventure
RPGs,
games, RPGs,
platformers.
platformers, which the Genesis has its own degree of platformers. They do.
Hmm.
But and don't get me wrong, there are RPGs on the Genesis. I mean, hell, I love Shining Force. I mean, like
I
they have
Ever
that.
Oasis.
Right. Oh, Beyond Oasis.
Beyond Oasis, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
wonderful game.
Ever
But
Oasis
those
is
are
on the 3DS, I think.
yes, but those are more akin to like something like The Legend of Zelda. If you're looking like something
Mm.
like a Final Fantasy style game, there's really Fantasy Star, War
Fantasy
Song, and a
Star,
few others, and that's about it.
especially Fantasy Star 4, that's a super popular one.
Wonderful. But where did Fantasy Star cut its teeth on? The Master System. So I think
Yes.
that's really where that all kind of comes down to though. But yeah, I could totally understand because it's like Genesis, yeah, you want fast action experiences, arcade style experiences. That's why the shoot 'em up, shmup genre is so big on the Genesis, and there really
Hmm.
weren't that many on the Super NES. That's why sports games are so big on the Genesis, and they really weren't that big on the Super NES because they're about the more quick fire experiences, right?
Yeah.
But I think both systems are wonderful in their own right. I mean, personally, I prefer the Genesis,
Oh,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, but the Super Nintendo was such a beast, and that's why I think there were more people that actually had both consoles back then that didn't really think about it. But that's why the console war back then was so much more fun because you had like real major arguments. Oh, it's like, oh well, Sega has this, and this. Well, Nintendo has this, and this, and then like it's kind of bantering back and forth. Nowadays, it's like,
Which
okay.
I
Uh,
hate console fanboys.
uh,
I'm a like okay, disclaimer, I consider myself a quote unquote Sony fanboy, but it's
mhm.
not like a fanboy in the fact that like if you like Xbox, I'm going to start debating you about the merits over a company's brand
Right,
versus my
yeah,
brand. Like it's the
yeah.
most insane fucking arguments that are out there, especially on Twitter, man. Like
Oh, yeah.
I have never like there's one guy I follow who's not a fan, like not one of he's very much one of those he likes all consoles for different reasons. But
Mhm.
for some reason this guy, I don't know why he does it, but he engages with these people. And I never see these people at all, the people who are so devoted to the brand of their console. But he decides to engage with them and I just don't understand why. I don't get why you would willingly put yourself in that situation. It makes no sense. Okay. We've digressed a little bit, but we should wrap up. We're going at an hour and 45 minutes at this point. Um, any final thoughts on the Master System or any final games that you wanted to bring up that we kind of got sidetracked from?
Well, final thoughts about the Master System. I guess there's one game that, and I'm looking at my short list of games that I was thinking about talking about, and I covered most of them, but I realized I skipped one that I really shouldn't have skipped. And I know so like with a lot of the collector scene, they might be familiar with this one, Golden Axe Warrior. This
Okay.
one that like a lot of people miss about that because I mean most people know what Golden Axe is, Well, a lot of people don't know about Golden Axe Warrior. Golden Axe Warrior was basically Sega's first real attempt at a Zelda-style game. That and,
Okay.
oh, I forget what the name of the other one is. There's another one, Govelius, Temple of Doom on the Master System. I mean, the thing is that it's interesting how the Master System has more action RPG experiences that really come to the forefront of my mind than the Genesis does. And Golden Axe Warrior is one of those games. It has a fantastic story, excellent graphics, beautiful music. It's just a lot of fun to play. The battle system is a lot of fun. It's a game that I really, really recommend anybody checking out. Uh, just trying to find an actual copy of the game because yeah, it's expensive, but I know it's on. I know it's on at least one of the Sega compilations. I think it's on the one for PS3, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
I think it's that one, but I know it's on one of them. But between that, Rastan by Taito, that was an excellent conversion of the arcade game. Better than the Genesis one. Rastan Saga 2 on the Genesis. Another one that I think is better on the Master System versus on the Genesis. But I mean, they're different games, but still, they're ports of the arcade.
This may be
But
another video idea for you, man. Like finding the superior Master System versions
oh, I've
to the
had that on my
Gen.
list for a while. I've had that
Oh,
on my
I
list for a
believe
while. I
it.
just haven't
I
gotten a
believe
chance to
it.
do it yet.
That's a lot
But
of research to do too.
oh yeah, yeah. And another kind of random PAL port that I didn't mention, Road Rash. A lot of people don't know about Road Rash on the Master System. And if you really want to see just how impressive the Master System can be, take a look at Road Rash on the Master System. It's almost like if you squint really, really closely, it's so close to the Genesis version. Like it's not even funny how close it is. Like they did an outstanding job. Now it is a port. It is a straight up port. But it's a wonderful port. Like they did a great job with it. But yeah, and that's what I normally say just to kind of wrap up my thoughts about the Master System is just that it's a real shame that Sega didn't quite get the impact that Nintendo did like back in the 8-bit days. But to me, I feel that with the possible exception of the Sega Saturn, I feel that the Master System is probably Sega's diamond that more people really need to experience in. And it is a system that I feel like there is a little bit of something for everyone. There's not a whole lot of games for it, but there is a little bit of something for everybody. And if you're willing to give it a shot, there's some outstanding games on there. And especially to Sonic fans, play Sonic 1 on Master System. I implore you. If you've never played it, play it. Like it's such a wonderful game. But and then dig deep into it. Don't just if you're gonna get into the Master System, whether you play it through various means or if you actually want to collect or whatnot, don't just rely on the US library. Explore what's out there in the PAL territories and in the Japanese areas. There's so many cool and unique games, and there's just some that you'll think to yourself, like, wow, why did we never get that?
I think that's. I mean, I really couldn't put it any better myself. I will say, at least from my end, it's worth checking out. Just even from a historical aspect, like there's just so many interesting things about the Master System that I just really want to dive into more. Like I mentioned Zillion before. I really want to try Zillion out because it looks really cool. I do think the Master System seems to have more of that home console vibe that I'm looking for. That the Genesis has more, like we were talking about before, has more an arcade experience to it. And I in a weird sense, something that we didn't really talk that much about, but this is a quick hit. I just love the way it looks. Like visually, it still looks really sleek. It the design of it's really fun. I love the like there it's black, but it's got this red square or rectangle kind of towards like off centered, and it tells you where the like it kind of gives a diagram of like what all the different buttons do, and it looks really cool to me. I even like the way the controller looks, even if the controller itself is kind of ass. The buttons are fine. It's just the D pad is awful. But I think what's interesting about the Master System to me is that it's very much the forgotten child in Sega's, at least for North America, in Sega's North American library. It's one of those things where it's like people know about the Saturn and the Dreamcast because it came after the Genesis. You know, the Genesis put them on the map, not just in North America, but globally. It really it made everyone aware of what Sega is and what they are and what they can do. And because of that, no one talks about the Master System. And because of that, no one even knows about the SG-1000 series. Very
Right.
few people know about it. So I feel like the Master System in itself is kind of a gateway into Sega's unknown history because their mascot prior to Sonic was Alex Kidd. Not
Right.
many people know Alex Kidd or know what I've never even played an Alex Kidd game. I don't know much about the character itself, but like the Master System is like gateway into Sega's untapped history, and I feel like that's worth checking out for that reason alone. And yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. So, G, thank you so much for joining me on this episode, man. I was a little worried, not because of not because you were on the episode. I was worried I wasn't going to be able to talk about the Master System for as long as we have, and we have gone for almost 2 hours diving deep into this. So, I can't thank you enough for coming onto this episode.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. Like I said, I don't really get a chance to talk about Master System nearly as much as I would like to, and yeah, it was absolutely wonderful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Where can everybody find you online, and is there anything you'd like to promote?
Sure. Well, you can find me online. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. At my name, it's at G to the next level. Of course, I have my YouTube channel, youtube.com/G to the next level. That's basically my home. I've been there for 5 years. Still pumping out new content today. It's not all Sega. It's pretty much retro focused, but it's not all Sega. Console reviews, game lists, personal reviews, childhood stories, all kinds of awesome stuff that I love doing. And I'm also streaming on Twitch. Also retro and retro inspired stuff, twitch.tv/G to the next level. And one last thing too, project that I'm working on is I'm actually writing a book about the Sega Genesis as well.
Yo,
So it's just like
awesome.
keep an eye out for that. I'm hoping to maybe get some major traction on it within the next year. But yes, I'm really excited about that. But once again, yes, thank you so much for having me on. This has been excellent.
Thank you for coming on, man. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me at stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do it in a number of ways. You can either give it a 5-star rating or slash review, on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use. That helps more people find the show, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. You can also support me monetarily, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. At the $1 level, you'll get the episodes a couple days early at a higher bit rate, plus access to a patron exclusive Discord. And at the $5 level, you'll get all of that plus 2 additional bonus episodes a month. At the time of this recording, my most recent episode was me diving into the MMC chips on Nintendo cartridges, basically talking about how the Nintendo couldn't do as much as you thought it could. In fact, Mario 3 would not be able to run on a Nintendo natively without the help of these MMC chips. So I do an episode diving into what those chips did for Nintendo and how they helped elongate the NES's life cycle. So topics like that. By the time this episode comes out, I'll probably have a Christmas episode where I'm just talking about some Christmas memories. So who knows? So patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But if you have limited funds, the most important place you can actually use that money towards is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care in hospitals. So if you want to go support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all the time I have for you today. G, once again, thank you for joining me.
Yes, by all means. Thank you so much for having me.
And I will see you all next time.